Welcome everyone to Gen X News. This is, of course, one of our kind of Halloween shows, and we're not necessarily focusing on Halloween or something super spooky. We're focusing today on the film director, maker, whatever you want to say, Kenneth Anger, and his book series that he did called Hollywood Babylon. But he also, collected a lot of information about Hollywood. It was his life. Really fascinating stuff. There's some documentaries on YouTube. I say check it out. But he's a really interesting character. He did a lot of really, my guest will probably get into it, but not mainstream films, but very interpretive art house kind of films that, yeah, it's not mainstream, so maybe you won't find it interesting, but I find it interesting. And I also love that he wrote a lot about Hollywood and all of the discrepancies. I'll put it that way. Now, before I bring my guest in, I want you guys to know we are streaming live, of course, on X, Rumble, and YouTube. Please subscribe on Rumble. YouTube's been a pain. YouTube's always a pain for me, but the Rumble is Gen X on X, so you can subscribe on the Rumble channel. I'm slowly building up. I have close to 1,900 subscribers on YouTube, and I just don't get the reach. I have like maybe 180, 178 on Rumble, and I get way more views. So Rumble is the place if you want to support me that way to subscribe. Gen X on X, check it out. Just at the bottom of the screen there, you can see our guests this month after my guest today, who's Gary Parsons, who's also his whole life has been, immersed in film. And I can't wait to talk to him about this. But next week, Dean Bertram comes on the 9th. I've got KT Truther coming on the 16th. Kieran Woodhouse, who's also hails from United Kingdom, has a paranormal documentary he wants to talk about on the 23rd of October. Dan Klefstad, American author. We're talking about vampires and the origins of vampires on the 29th of October. And I have folklorist Bob Antone from Washington State coming on the 30th. He's going to tell you some spooky stories. So we're keeping it Halloweeny. My other days that I'm on, we'll probably get up with politics because everybody knows the big election is happening. So thank you guys very much for tuning in. I know the show's a little bit early, but when I have guests who are at different time zones, we have to flex and make sure it works for our guests. So 3 p.m. Eastern it is instead of 8, but we'll have fun. And if you can't catch us live, of course, you can catch it on the replay. But no more chatter. Let's bring Gary in. Welcome to the show, Gary.
Hi.
How
Good
is
to see you
everything
again.
I always say this, but how is everything in jolly England? I know that's such a
It's not very
stereotypical.
jolly, and it never is. I
No.
mean, it's been raining here for like about 2 or 3 days, so it's like where it feels like being in Blade Runner without all the wonderful sort of sci-fi scenery. To be fair with you,
Right.
it's the UK is going through lots of politics stuff as well this year. We've had big election and things, and so it's been a bit bit
Well,
unsettling
I
sort
won't.
of time for
I'm gonna respect some of the. I hear a lot of the stuff coming to the UK, so I'm not gonna ask you to talk about politics, just in case
Oh,
somebody
absolutely
on
not. No.
Twitter reports you and you get arrested, or so. We won't go there. We'll stick to film, and be safe. Great. I mean, I'm in Utah and it's hot here still. It's warm. We went on
No,
vacation last week. We were in Goblin Valley. It's like deserty it feels like you're in Tatooine on Star Wars, and it was so hot. I was like, oh my God, I'm not used to
it,
it. It's still warm.
it's very autumnal now. It's a little bit like, in the old Universal movies, horror movies where it's constant like rain and drizzle and sometimes
Yes.
thunderstorms outside, and you almost
Oh,
expect,
I
I don't
love
know,
that.
Frankenstein's monster to come out from the grave somewhere or whatever else. So it's been it's been very much like that.
I like that weather, but I lived on Vancouver Island and it would be raining. Like after a while, you get depressed because you need your vitamin D. You need some
Yeah,
sunshine. So if that's too long, I can understand why you're like in England, like, okay, we need some
yeah,
sunshine
yeah.
on the
You
coast.
get to a point and
We
you
need
think,
Spain.
oh, no. So
So
you start growing webbed feet and webbed hands,
I
like in
know.
a H.P.
Canadians
Lovecraft story or something.
Canadians take off to Mexico. I think in England you guys go to Spain or something, or to get a little sunshine break.
Yeah.
Right? All right. So
Or anywhere apart from here to get sunshine break, to be
that's
fair.
right. So Before we get into Kenneth Anger, you've been a filmmaker for a long time, and so what started you on your journey to being a filmmaker and researching Kenneth Anger?
To be honest with you, Kenneth Anger was one of the influences for me being a filmmaker. I saw his films. There used to be a cinema in London called the Scala Cinema, which used to show a lot of independent films, weird cult movies, horror movies, whatever else there. And they did an evening of showing Kenneth Anger's Magic Lantern cycle films, and I'd never seen them before. And I got someone sort of said we should go along and see them. I sat down and was like, I'd not seen anything like this before. I was about, golly, I don't know, about 19, 20 or something like that. This was in the 80s, and I'd not seen anything like that before. Nothing,
Mhm.
it was not the sort of films you'd see at your local cinema, and it was nothing you'd see, pick up on VHS at the time. And again, it inspired me to sort of think that someone could make films like that. And again, it comes very much from that sort of tradition of people like Louis Buñuel and all that kind of thing, and the surrealist short movies and that
Mhm.
sort of stuff. So again, those are the things that inspired me to make films. I was never one into all the big Hollywood production things. I liked
Mhm.
the idea of making, for want of a better word, and it's a horrible word, really, art house films. I like the idea of
That's
that.
the word I was thinking.
Yeah, it's one of those strange things. I mean, the one thing that Anger inspired me to do was the fact that you could make a film without dialogue, and that was when I saw those movies. That was a big, big thing. And again, similar to something like Unshi and Andalou or some of those earlier movies, it made me understand silent film a lot more and respect silent film a lot more.
Mhm.
And but it also made me understand the fact that you can tell a story without having to use dialogue. And I think it's a really, really important thing that sometimes film can be like music. Film doesn't have to be, um, the hero story, which is the beginning, the middle, and the end. That there's an adversary, they go up against the adversary. There's a point near the end where they're going to fail their mission, and in the end they manage to do it. Star Wars is a perfect example of that kind of thing. The hero quest, the hero story. And I like the
Mhm.
idea of being able to make films where you could immerse yourself in a film without it being story led. So, like music, you could put it on and then you could take away what you wanted to from the film. So there's nothing you can sort of, I've done talks where I've done screenings of my films, and people will ask me questions at the end, and you'll get three or four different people having three or four different, coming away with three or four different, opinions about what the movie was about. And I
Mhm.
like that. I like just not having that one thing where you're just kind of going that. And Kenneth Anger was one of the people that taught me how to do that within cinema. And so, yeah, he was a big influence. So, I mean, as I said, I've been here before. I've talked about my father. My father used to work in the film industry in Britain, and he
Right?
worked for
For Hammer
Carry On.
Horror?
Yeah, Carry On Films. He worked for as well, which I'm not sure is how well known they are in America. But
Yeah, I don't know. People get
uh,
upset about those these days. I think they're kind of
yeah,
funny, but I can see why people are like, "Oh my god."
people get upset about Hammer horror films, and for the same reason. And
That's crazy.
mm,
Hmm.
he also made he was also during company that made all these things like Confessions of a Window Cleaner films. So yeah, so he worked within the industry. Oh yeah, these films are like low grade. They're called British sex comedies. There's no sex in them, and there's very little comedy in them. So
There's probably a lot of is there a lot of innuendo, though?
oh, hell of a lot of innuendo.
Ooh,
Yes,
that's what I
yes,
thought.
oh yes.
Yes.
But these films are big box office in the day here in the UK. I mean, what was it? I think Confessions of a Window Cleaner or something like that outsold The Godfather in its first week in the UK. So twice as many people went to see Confessions of a Window Cleaner than went to see The Godfather in the
That's
UK.
interesting. That's
So
totally
that
interesting.
says a lot about the British psyche, I think, as well. Um,
You're like, "Mafioso?" Or "Confession?" Yeah, I gotcha. I know you know
yeah,
what? But some of them are fun, like, I go back often before we get in Kenneth Anger. Like, I don't watch modern stuff, and I think we had this as a conversation before. I watch a lot of 60s and 70s TV
Mm,
shows, spooky stuff. I like it, like Dark Shadows. There's
yeah,
what Circle of Fear. There's some British shows that I watch. There's also Night Gallery. Like, I like watching
yeah.
these old shows. I just feel they're more creative and they're more spooky and they get atmosphere better.
When I was a kid in the 70s, you'd grow up with spooky TV, and that included, I mean, British kids television in the early 70s
Spooky.
was yeah, it was just weird beyond belief. We had things like Children of the Stones, and
Yeah.
we,
That's spooky, guys. You gotta watch it on YouTube. It's
th-
good.
that's we had this a TV series called Shadows, which is all different like short
Mhm.
stories,
I've
ghost
seen it.
stories or spooky stories or whatever else. And there's no wonder my generation grew up being so odd. I mean,
Are
that
you
carried
Gen
on
X?
through.
You're
Was
Gen
that so?
X? You're born in the '60s, are you Gen
Yeah,
X?
yeah, that's right.
We're
Yeah.
all Gen X. You hear? I
Um,
am Gen X, later Gen X, though.
and that kind of carried on British television until till like the early 80s. And
Mhm.
I always think the last cut off show like that that had anything to do with weirdness and paganism and goodness knows whatever else was Robin of Sherwood, which is obviously also a popular show in the States as well.
Oh, I've
And
never
that
seen
was,
that one.
you've never seen it. It's beautifully filmed, it's wonderfully acted, and it's the Robin Hood myth put up against sort of a pagan Celtic, mythology.
Right.
And it's
Un
it's one of the most beautiful things. The soundtrack's done by Clanad, who are a
Yeah.
well-known band
Well,
and things.
and a lot of people, like, because there's a lot of Christians, they don't like anything pagan, and they'll be critical of people who are doing paganism, but I always remind them, "Look, England has a pagan history.
Yeah, yeah,
Whether you
yeah.
like it, America doesn't really.
Mm.
It's very Christian, but England, you cannot avoid it. When you go there, there's Stonehenge, there's Avebury. You cannot miss the
Oh,
pagan
yeah, yeah,
history.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
sorry, it's just part of the
But
culture
what the thing
immersed
is,
in with Christianity.
yeah, the thing what happens within Robin of Sherwood is it takes the fact of the Norman invaders being Christian, and the original Saxon people, which they would have been, Anglo-Saxon people still hanging on to sort of pagan beliefs, and
Yeah.
that was very true at the time because I mean, the Saxons were kind of that there's that even though they might still go to church on a Sunday, during the rest of the week they were doing other things,
Mhm.
and because they also found that Christianity was an enforced religion upon them because of the Normans. Even
Right.
though parts of Britain had been Christianized before that, but yeah, there were still parts like the Celtic end of it, Wales, Cornwall, that sort of
Mhm.
clung on to all these
And
things. So.
that's going to influence film and art house, and it's interesting because Kenneth Anger, he's American, right? But
Mm,
he seems
mm.
to be influenced by some of these kind of mythologies that are not necessarily Christian, let's just say.
He takes on board a lot of British writers from a certain era. That's one of his things. Again, even within some of his films, he actually filmed one of his probably his biggest and best known film. A lot of it here in the UK. In fact, he
Right.
moved to the UK during the about 1969. He moved to the
Mhm.
UK and lived here for a while. He lived with Jimmy Page, the rap guitar
Is that
player of
and
Led Zeppelin.
he didn't he have Marianne Faithfull in that one?
Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Marianne
She
Faithfull
was
was
the
in it,
actress.
and
Yeah.
Anita Pallenberg. He was very pally with in the Stones. One of his films, Mick Jagger does the soundtrack for. So he
Wow.
kind of he in a weird way he fell out of love with America, and there's a whole lot of reasons why he fell out of love with America. And he came to England because he thought, number one, at that time Britain he felt was happening. We had the Beatles, we had the
Swinging
Stones, we had
60s.
this
Yeah.
swinging,
Yeah.
that whole vibe thing going on here. But also we also had a thing over here which was the witchcraft revival as well, and that was all
Okay. Yeah.
happening in amongst everything else. That was
And
it was a
yeah.
melting pot.
European film is very different from Hollywood, so maybe he was disillusioned with Hollywood, like you say.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
He
he
knows a
spent
lot. He writes a lot
yeah,
about Hollywood.
yeah. He spent a lot of time in France as well. He studied with Jean Cocteau, the filmmaker, writer, and artist. So he knew him. So he made a film there called Rabbit's Moon, which is kind of a comedy. Not, no, I don't know how you say it. It's a take on Pierrot and Columbine, on that kind of thing. So it's so he was very much. In fact, actually, he was actually paid to do that from in Paris. He was, the money he got was all French money to make that film. So he
Wow.
by that even by that point he was kind of being a bit disillusioned with America and Hollywood and everything.
Hmm.
So he goes over to France first of all, goes back to the States after spending a couple of years in France, and then comes to England. The other thing I have to say now, forget, talking about Hollywood Babylon. Hollywood Babylon was originally published in France before it was
Oh,
published in America. So it was originally published in France. So there was a small edition of it published in Paris. I think it was Loisfeld or whatever his name was, the guy who used to do a lot of what we call uh, sort of cartoon books, graphic novels, I suppose they would be known
right.
as now. But he produced a lot of those which had, a slightly more explicit nature to them, etc., etc. And I think the first printing of that was made by him.
So
So
does Kenneth Anger ever get into the start of Hollywood and why it was started? Like
um,
how it came
yeah,
about or
yeah.
what its purpose was? Does he start
Basically,
there?
yeah, he understands that the fact of, I mean, all film starts with the Lumiere brothers.
Hmm.
And then, in France, and then we have people like Mellet, Georges Mellet, who made a lot of. There's a film called Voyage dans la Lune, which is a voyage to the moon, which is a wonderful, the earliest science fiction film we have in a weird way. So
Hmm.
he realizes that basically film comes from Europe and then comes to America. But what America does is America then makes it a business, whereas Europe doesn't make it a business. Um,
Ah,
you have to remember that America then started. How can I put it? Bringing in directors from Europe as well. So eventually, you'd get uh, people like Fritz Lang, who made Metropolis, coming over and making films. They would use, especially during the 30s, they would use a lot of German expressionism. I mean, Universal Studios is built on effectively a lot of the German and British um, directors. I mean, so you've got that sort of whole European aesthetic that comes over during that period of time. Before that, I mean, during the silent era, um, you got your Cecil B. DeMille's and all those kind of people.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
You got the big guys, and basically this is where the whole idea of Babylon starts within the silent era, because
Oh,
you have what they did was they made people stars. And what happens is the fact of, and it was very, Valentino is obviously probably the biggest name star from the silent era of Hollywood, and
mhm.
all these people they didn't really know what to do with with themselves. Suddenly it's thrust. This is a whole new ball game. They've gone from film being something that's very kind of, would be shown in a tent somewhere, to suddenly they're almost cult icons. I mean, there was someone who said that Hollywood has more stars than there are in heaven. So
That's
and
almost
then
sacrilegious to some people. Oh, brave.
yes, yeah. But it was a kind of, it was a good copy byline that they were using, and because suddenly they start realizing that and making stars. I mean,
Hmm.
and I think that was a very slow progression. It didn't sort of happen overnight. It suddenly happened, that fact of, oh my god, this person's putting more bums on seats than other people are. And
Right.
then they suddenly realise
Body
that if
count,
we promote
money.
them, and you've got to remember, like, the print age was big then, that kind of thing. So, you know, it was the first time they started doing things like fan magazines, for starters, for the very start. I mean, I think Valentino had fan magazines or papers, that were kind of almost dedicated to him. And then you started getting a lot of the female stars, Clara Bow being one of the big ones. Unfortunately, most of
Mhm.
Clara Bow films now have disappeared, sadly.
Yes, Louise
But
Brooks is another one that I found really
yeah,
iconic with
yeah,
her
Louise
bob.
Brooks didn't make it big in
Not
America,
as
first of all.
not as big, yeah,
No,
but
no,
I
no, she
mean,
did. She
she
kind of
did
did later on,
well,
but
she was really difficult, but I mean, I don't think she ever wanted to be an actor.
her big films were made in Germany.
Yeah,
Her
in
big
the
films are
Weimar
made,
Republic.
her big films are made in the Weimar era in Germany. So,
Mhm,
Pandora's Box and Diary of a Lost Girl, all
mhm.
that kind of thing.
Yeah,
Her big movies are now her icon movies were all made in Germany. They had nothing to do
with
with
America.
America. So
Yeah,
she came from America. She came from America to Europe because she
yeah,
didn't like the way she was being treated in America. To be fair,
yeah,
and she was a difficult person anyway. So
she was.
she goes to Europe to sort of become a star in Europe. And so basically, what
I just
happens is Europe then sells Louise Brooks back to America. So yeah,
Well, I just
because
loved her iconic look, like, she had that sorta Dutch bob and sleek, and I
oh
just
yeah,
thought she was way ahead in modernism, and I felt like when I watched her acting, I felt like she could have been someone today acting. It wasn't as
yeah,
exaggerated as silent films, it was more natural, and I think she was ahead of her time and didn't know it.
absolutely. But I mean, she was one of a kind. The unfortunate thing is, I mean, she did well for herself. I mean, she could have been bigger. She took some wrong steps along the way, maybe.
A few,
And
yeah,
she's one of
quite
the
a
few
few.
stars that actually, from the silent era, that survived into the talkies. You got to remember a
Yes,
lot of the silent era stars. As soon as the talkies started coming in,
they were done.
they were kind of redundant because they
Yeah,
couldn't do it. They could emote, but they couldn't act, and
yeah.
that's a different thing.
Well, I
Um,
just add this, I find it funny because a lot of people thought that Louise Brooks was a bad actor because she wasn't that oh, and
mm,
technology changes that, where she actually is a good actress because she was being herself, and she actually has a nice voice. I listened to an interview with her,
okay,
but
yeah,
they thought she was a bad actress at the time. A lot of people did because she wasn't as extreme in her emotions.
okay. No, she was a bad Hollywood actress.
Oh, yeah.
That's the difference. But
Yeah.
she was a great European actress
Amazing.
because in Europe we weren't kind of looking for that same especially the Germans and the French weren't looking for that same kind of thing.
Yeah.
Whereas in the States you were looking for the melodramatic kind of
Yeah.
way of
The
presenting
train running
something.
over the
Yeah,
girl on the train
yeah.
tracks kinda
But
thing.
don't get me wrong. America produced Buster Keaton and whatever else. So
Mhm,
Harold Lloyd. Um, but at the same time, Europe wasn't looking for that same kind of melodrama in the same way.
mhm.
So
Right.
she was a great European actress. She came over, I think, and did well in Europe purely because she was right for Europe.
Mhm.
Certainly right for the German expressionism, but I don't think she was right for Hollywood. And
No.
you compare her to
Well,
other Hollywood silent actresses of the day, Lillian Gish and people like that. You know, um,
yeah.
Again, Gish didn't really. Well, as soon as the talkies came
Mary
in,
Pickford.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And you also
Yeah.
have to remember that by the time, again, a lot of by the time the talkies started coming in, a lot of these people were dropping like flies as well. To be fair with you, so that's
Yeah.
another aspect of it.
Exactly.
So
They were limited.
yeah, and already they were kind of peaking in fame. I mean, Clara Bow is a very good example of that.
Mhm.
She was famous and infamous at the same time,
Yeah.
and
The It Girl.
many, yeah,
The
but many
It
of the
Girl.
stories about her were absolute mythology as well.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah. People made up horrible stories about her that were
yeah, yeah,
untrue. It was
mm,
I think it was about a court case. One of her friends or that she accused them of stealing money. So she's taken to court, and that woman went and just spread a whole bunch of disgusting stories that were not true.
yeah, yeah.
Like, really disgusting, like bestiality and all sorts of things.
I mean, she came from a dirt poor background,
Mhm,
and she was a prostitute for a while. We know that for certain. And
mhm.
and so she basically worked her way up to being the it girl. So,
Mhm.
and she did that literally by a kind
Well,
of, hard graft and making some right choices and probably getting to know the right people as well. I mean, it's the Hollywood system. You have to remember that the Hollywood system at that time also had a thing. I mean, the famous, you must have heard of this, the famous Max Sennett casting couch.
yes, I wanted to get into that kind of thing because that's where a lot of the Babylon-y stuff
Yeah.
and the concept of Hollywood is awful comes from, and
Yeah.
we still see it today. Maybe
I
not
mean,
Max Sennett casting couch, but we're seeing horrible, even worse stuff today.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the thing is, I mean, it really all starts with, D.W. Griffith and things. I mean, the whole Babylon aspect of it starts because obviously he was building huge sets for films like Intolerance and whatever else, using lots of extras, and people would die on set. I mean, you got to remember this is the thing. Extras would die on set. They were extra people, and this is the whole thing. That was almost like life was cheap. He didn't care. He carried on making the movies.
Oh
So
my god.
and that sort of bled through into again once the stardom thing hit people. Hollywood still does this today, and I think someone perhaps I don't know, like Matthew Perry is a pretty good example of it. They build you up and they knock you down and they forget you and they forget who you are, and suddenly you're used to
And
having you
here's
know
another element. They build you up, they knock you down, they forget you, and then they take your tragic story and all the gossip and they
oh yeah,
monetize it and make more money from it, all the propaganda that they lie about.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
what
yeah,
is really messed up.
absolutely. I mean, Anger grew up. If it, if we're going to talk about Anger, now, I mean, Anger grew up within that. He was born and bred in Hollywood, effectively. His mother worked for one of the studios. I think his grandmother had something to do with one of the studios. Anyway, basically, it was in his blood. So um, he's famous again. Okay, I'm going to use the word allegedly quite a lot when we talk about Anger, and the
Mhm.
reason why I'm going to use that is because Anger does a thing called self mythologizing.
Mhm.
And what he does is he sort of makes up tall stories about himself that he repeats so often that I think in the end he actually ended up believing these things actually happened to him. Okay, one of the infamous stories that he makes up and that people actually believed was fact up until probably about 5 years before he died was the fact of that he played the prince, the child prince, in the Max Reinhardt film, like 1935 film of A Midsummer Night's Dream. Now, in every interview he gave, he said that he played the prince in this film. He remembered what it was like on set. He was saying like, I remember it was like this, like you could smell this. It was like da 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 da, and the actors and whatever else. He was very convincing about it all. And it was only found out maybe, oh goodness, 5, 6 years ago that actually the person who played the prince in A Midsummer Night's Dream was actually a girl, a female actress who was called Sheila Brown. So he had people, there's books out there saying that he is the prince in this film, and he never was. He was in A Midsummer Night's Dream. There's a photograph of him as one of the fairies, like one of the child fairies in A Midsummer Night's Dream, and you can see him within a split second a couple of times in the film. So he actually was on set, but what he did was he built up his role from being this, you know, extra in the background to being having a starring role in it because it was never mentioned on the credits of the film who the actor was or actress, as it turns out, playing
They're
the
just
playing the prince in it. So he just sort of
mhm.
he went from he bigged himself up from being this person who's on screen for maybe 10 seconds throughout the entire film to having this role. So but again, that's Hollywood mythology. What all Anger's doing is he's creating a mythology the same way as actors from the silent era and onwards, even up until today, create a mythology about themselves. So he
Right.
starts off with this. And I think he repeated the story so often that he actually ended up believing it, in some way. Sometimes if you
Well,
say something so
that's
often, you kind of believe that
a
it
lot
is
of
that fact.
a lot of narcissists will do that. That
Yeah.
you know it's a lie. You could even have all the proof. You could set it in front of them and they'll say it so often. It's true to them now. even though it
Yeah,
never happened. It's like their
yeah.
brain,
I mean,
they trick their brain into believing it.
what he says about what happens on set was about being verified. So that was the weirdest thing, is the fact of like, so he must have been there as a child actor, being on set, and was, because that was verified by the people saying, yes, this is what we use, this is what we did, and this is what happened on set for the film. And I mean, because the whole film was studio based uh, film anyway. Um, and so he was correct in that respect. So, but he knew that because he did have a small role in the film. There is a photo somewhere of him, and you can
Yes.
just see him in amongst a group of other fairies, and you can tell it's him because it's very much Kenneth Anger's face. To be fair,
Yeah,
as
he
even
has
as
a
a child,
distinct look. Yeah, exactly.
yeah. And so yeah, again, he self mythologizes, but then that's part of the Hollywood myth. So he's playing in. I mean, he grew up with the his grandmother, or I think it is, bringing home like the magazines of all the stars, about the stars. You know, they'd have Hollywood Reporter magazines, and he'd read about all these things. These stories then become the fundamental basis of Hollywood Babylon, the books. So he starts sort of kind of reading about, some of the tawdry things that happen, to some of the stars or whatever else. But these things are a mixture between building the stars up and tittle tattle, same as we have today. There's is it? I don't know if you. Correct me if I'm wrong here. National Enquirer in America does a similar sort of
Yeah,
thing,
that
is it?
I don't know, because honest to goodness, I think reality is crazier than the National Choir these days, but that was originally the like tabloid kind of fodder. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and and so there's that kind of thing happening even then. So, and again, it was
Hmm.
a lot of the studios would think, there's no such thing as bad publicity, until it really began to bite them on the butt quite a big time, because then those things start becoming tragedies, as in like the Fatty Arbuckle
Hmm.
case.
That was
Um,
horrific.
yeah, and you got to remember
I
this.
mean, there's real life consequences. Like, I think
Yeah,
sometimes some of these creative people, like, I believe you need conservative and logical people, but I also believe society needs creative people. You need a
but
balance,
yeah,
right? But sometimes I think they get locked up in a bubble and they don't actually realize how normal people perceive things.
but also think you got to remember this was the first time that all this was happening.
Right. There
So
was
we'd
no
never had,
precursor.
there's never been such a thing as film stars before that. The
Mhm.
same way as the way that in the 50s and 60s rock music took over, Presley and whatever else in the States, over here the
Yeah.
Beatles and things. That it was kind of unprecedented. So people weren't used to kind of the way it got handled. And I think if you're being told that you are the greatest act, you're surrounded probably by yes people. Even then, you're the greatest
Exactly.
actor, you're this, you're that, you're whatever else. You like to have a good time all the time, to quote the Spinal Tap thing. And you can afford to have that. Then it's a very different thing.
Well,
We're not in the age now where social media is everywhere, or even, to be fair with you, as it would have been in the 70s and the 80s and whatever else, where people should have been more aware, and obviously weren't. But like, at that time, that you were told you were a god on the screen, and this, that, and the
yeah.
other, and
And
that's gonna
And
go to your head.
just think, if you're somebody who came from a poor neighborhood in
Yeah.
Liverpool, or a poor outback like Elvis Presley or like Clara Bow, and suddenly you have all of this stuff, it's like, how do you
Well,
process that, right?
you have to remember that most of the stars from Hollywood at that time came from dirt poor backgrounds. I mean, they weren't rich people. I mean, uh, Louise Brooks ran away from home when she was 16.
Yeah.
So, or maybe even a little. I think she might have been 15 actually. I think, if I right remember. But she ran away while she was effectively still a child, to go
Yes.
and join the circus, join theatre troops, all that kind of thing. And suddenly you're propelled into a world where, you know, you come from a dirt poor background. I'm pretty sure Fatty Arbuckle came from a very poor background, and suddenly you're being held up as a god. Chaplin's the same thing. Chaplin grew up in South London, here,
Mhm.
not too far from where I live, and it came from a very poor, very deprived background. And then, there he is. And then slowly he goes to the States and slowly works himself up, and then suddenly he's a god. amongst the film. And look what happens to him. He has all these different affairs. Um, I think his youngest wife was 16. I think wasn't she, Lolita, or
Yeah,
whatever her name is. So I mean,
that's young.
again, we're in a different world altogether here.
Yes.
So it's a very different prospect from
Now, do you think like there's a lot of these poor people they're escaping certain elements? I always saw like Hollywood has that um sort of I don't know, perception about it that, go to Hollywood and make it big. There's a lot of young girls fleeing to Hollywood, possibly fleeing to danger, but also young girls that might have personality disorders, might have
yeah.
borderline, might have real serious emotional issues, and they don't know. And they're going to Hollywood to make it big, and they may make it big, but most of
Absolutely.
them probably got hurt.
Yeah, most of them fall by the wayside. For every
Yeah.
one that gets big, there's probably 100 that probably fall by the wayside. And I think that definitely still happens today. I think I think for less reasons than it probably did back then, because I think people literally did come from being dirt poor to then becoming, and they saw that the stars gleaming in the sky. And I think now people just sort of, in a more of a narcissistic way, probably think I'm going to go to Hollywood and be famous because I'm young, beautiful, da la 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 la. And
Hmm,
so
hmm.
it's a different. I think it's a different system now than it certainly. I
Well,
think
and they
I think the
don't
same things
have
happen in it, but like
they
you
don't
know,
actually realize what Hollywood really is. They see the glitz and glamour on the
mm,
screen or the advertisement, which I call propaganda because it is propaganda.
yeah,
They
yeah,
don't understand the system, the mechanism that they're about to try to
yeah,
step into. That's
yeah.
my perception of it. The
I
Hollywood
mean,
Babylon is a system.
yeah, I mean, kind of what Anger does within the books. I mean, you have to remember that the first publication of Hollywood Babylon in the States was in 1965, and it was banned. Automatic was banned, so it was removed from publication. So if you find any
Wow.
copies of the 1965 edition of Hollywood Babylon, snap them in a thrift shop somewhere. Snap them up because they're probably worth a shed load of money. And the reason
Interesting.
why he originally published it in France, sorry, was the fact that he probably thought that there's a good chance he could still get sued, and if no one's going to read it if it's in French. When it finally gets published in the States, it gets banned outright, and it takes 10 years for it to be republished. Okay,
Interesting.
I'll show you this. This is a 1975 copy. So this is the reprint of
James
Hollywood Babylon.
Manfield.
Yeah. So yeah, and there's a story about that as
Wow,
well.
Jane, that's some cleavage.
Yes.
Why bother having a top?
But yeah, this is an original 1975 edition of the book. And
Now, she's a
so
character. I'll tell you what happened to her and all this stuff is kind of spooky.
okay, now let's get away with the myth building here.
All
Okay,
right.
Anger mentions in his book here that Jane Mansfield was decapitated in a car accident. Okay, she was in a car accident. That's true. Um,
Mhm.
and this is a rumor that was spread around by a guy called Anton LaVey, who was the leader of the
The
Church of
Church
Satan
of
at the
Satan.
time,
Yeah.
who sort of that Jane Mansfield was actually a member of. And he said that when she
Yes.
had the accident, she was decapitated in the car. Anger says that in his book. She was never decapitated in the car
Was she
accident.
scalped?
No, no, she was
No.
basically. I think she was punctured, if I rightly remember off the top of my head, and I could be
Okay.
wrong with that one. But she certainly wasn't decapitated. Okay, so again, we're looking at Anger here. Sort of printing mythologies. One of the stories about Clara Bow that he produces here again, which is an absolute myth, was the fact of that apparently she had sex with an entire football team. Okay,
Yeah.
and he produces that as fact, and again, that's part of one of the tittle tattle rumors that were going around, probably in print at the time when she was alive. And again, that we know that for a fact that never happened. So
Mhm.
I mean, she was fairly promiscuous, but she didn't actually have sex with an entire football team. So again,
Yeah.
that's a myth that he reproduces. So even everything that I mean, again, he says that Lupe Valez died of an overdose. She did do. She obviously did take an overdose, but apparently, he said that she was found, you know, hanging over the toilet basically in a pile of her own vomit and whatever else. That never happened. They didn't find her by the toilet. They actually found her lying by the side of her bed. I think it was her maid, because they realised that this was going to be a thing, and photographers were going to come along that actually put her in bed and made her look a bit more stately, like she had died in her sleep.
Oh,
So,
and that would
but
be
she
a
was,
no-no today
yeah,
because
yeah, yeah,
forensics.
yeah. I mean, she wasn't found, in the toilet, her head sort of down the toilet basin or
Yeah.
whatever else. So I mean, here we go. Anger. Again, I don't know whether he knew about. You got to remember, this is all pre-internet days. This is all pre, whatever. Trying to find out any information would have been hard. So, but he basically regurgitates some of the stories that would have been in the scandalous press at the time about some of these artists. And so, what we have to remember here, whereas a lot of what he says is accurate, and it is accurate, and we now know about, or we even knew about them. There are certain bits where he's looking at a mythology of it, and he's basically regurgitating what would have been kind of tittle tattle, for want of a better word, at the time.
Right.
So yeah, he does this real mixture of these things within Hollywood Babylon. But I think what it does do, though, and let's remember, like, not all the stories are inaccurate in it. We know about the guy that was how can I put it, killed and then had various things done to him by a golden dildo that Valentino gave to him.
Oh my
Look,
God.
yes,
Wow.
and, and on all those things are true. We know that like, so I would say about 80% of what's in Hollywood Babylon is probably true. We know
Okay.
definitely certain things, but there is that sort of kind of grey area with some
Well,
of the stars where he
right.
just basically regurgitates
Well,
what would have
I
been
always
tittle
found
tattle at the time.
Valentino's death a little suspicious anyways. There's a lot of suspicious stuff in Hollywood where
Yeah,
you'll
yeah,
never know the truth because there's a lot of people who will kill people for money and they've got the police behind them. They've got things
yeah.
fixed. Even today, Diddy had all the police. They just if they killed someone, shot him in the club, they just call a
Mm,
certain police and they'd be like, "Ah, suicide," or he shot himself or
yeah.
whatever. They
I
just
mean,
cover it up.
there was a woman up until the early 90s that would go and visit Valentino's grave every day. So,
Wow.
and take flowers to his grave every day. There's some wonderful footage of her, actually.
I think
And
I
I think,
seen that in the
yeah,
documentary on YouTube.
yeah, that probably would have been was it the British Arena documentary that was done about 1991 or
90? It
two?
had some
Yeah,
90 like, really bad 90s graphics or something.
yeah,
Like,
probably it
real
might have been. There was a British Arena documentary that with Anger in, where he goes through the Hollywood
mhm.
Babylon stories, and there's some footage of this woman going to Valentino's grave, and she was still. And he sort of says, that apparently she wasn't the only one. There's two or three, and he said some of them verging on the side of sanity. So, who would go and lay flowers at Valentino's grave, even in the 1990 early 90s. So they were still doing that. So there's a lot of, yeah. I mean, I mean, again, I come from Britain, so I mean, it's a very different thing for me to talk about sort of a
Of
Hollywood
course.
Hollywood system because never being there, but it all
Did
seems
now,
so
in
larger than life
England,
and
they
bizarre.
they didn't have anything like a casting couch system. Did they have
Yes, they
anything
did.
that even
Absolutely,
reflected that? I mean, you can
absolutely,
refer to that in England as well too. I don't mind.
Ab-
It doesn't all have to be about Hollywood because
absolutely.
it shows what for me, it's always money. When it's
Hmm.
money and it's profit, it always equals abusive system.
There was a book over here that was produced maybe about 10, 15 years ago called Shepperton Babylon, which
Okay.
basically Shepperton Studios were like the big studio. It was like kind of the a backlot studio of I don't know, Universal or wherever. Okay, it was a big studio here in the UK where a lot of films got made, including Hammer horror films. And there's a book called Shepperton Babylon, which basically uncovers a lot of the sordid details and things of of these stars and what was happening and whatever else at the time. So we have that happening here as well, but I don't think to the same degree it was happening in America, because you got to remember
Right.
our stars are kind of almost a bit more local stars. There were very few that
Yeah.
kind of went on elsewhere and made it big, if that makes sense. And that mainly happened with probably again more of our horror movie stars. And I think Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, maybe I think come over to the States and or
Hmm.
were well known or iconic figures, became iconic
Or
figures. But
like a thespian that was, really
yeah,
famous.
I mean Laurence Olivier would have been a prime.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
who I was thinking of.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
we had those kind of people, but our studio system was very different over here because um, you had the big studios over there, and so it was more rife for sort of how can I put it, um, more rife for people to take advantage of. I mean, I watched
Hmm.
a documentary the other night on WWE or WWF, whatever it used to be called, the World Wrestling thing,
Yeah, yeah.
and exactly the same thing was happened in that happened in the 20s, 30s, and 40s within the Hollywood system in America.
Oh.
So, companies buying each other out, that kind of thing, taking over whatever else. And there was a lot of shenanigans that went on. So and that was quite interesting. So knowing I was doing this interview, I watched this program. I was thinking, oh my god, this is honestly. If Kenneth Anger was here today, he could have made a book on just what was happening there. Again, people dying, their top stars,
World
they build them
Wrestling
up.
Babylon.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. They build them up, knock them down. Some of them died. Some of them actually died in
So
while they were performing as well. So, you know,
I have a serious question because the people who are running this stuff must be. Do you think they're psychopaths? Because if you had morals or empathy, I don't know how you could do this.
I think there's a thing of like um, again the guy who ran WWF came from a dirt poor background apparently. I think there's that thing of once you start making money and then you start doing good, you begin to believe that you're kind of invincible. And I think
Okay, and you can
that
do
happened
whatever
with
you want.
yeah, and I think that happened generally within filmmaking. You got to remember that there wasn't a lot of movie makers again, especially in the early days of silent film. You know, who were you influenced by? You weren't influenced by anyone because there was nobody.
Right.
So you were kind of
Well,
making up cinema as you went along in a strange way.
yeah.
So
Well, and
it's
I mean before Hollywood and film, because one of the things that's really interesting is because once you get film and production, now you have a more centralized form of entertainment. Whereas before, people would go to local theaters or they'd be at home telling stories. They
mm,
wouldn't have this centralized form of entertainment that
absolutely
like
yeah,
spreads a message. You would have some more local, traditional, family orientated,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
stuff.
Absolutely. You're kind of in a thing where this is a whole new ball game. And then
Hmm.
what Hollywood effectively does, and this is what Anger points out, is that it keeps that going because it knows it's its bread and butter money.
Yeah.
And and Anger's books are written pre-video age, I have to say that. So
Hmm.
film was still, people were going to see movies. I mean, I remember going
Right.
to
It
see
was
films when I was
movies or TV
yeah, yeah, uh,
and
and
radio.
but films are still important. Are still
Yes.
an important thing. I mean, big movies, I don't know, Star Wars, for instance, whatever else. I remember when I was a kid, Star Wars happening. It was like it was the biggest thing,
Yes.
that happened in film. Uh, Ruined film, in my opinion, but that's a different thing altogether. Now, now,
I
now I
do
know
love
better.
I love the original trilogy. I know I
Same
was born
here.
in the 70s, so
Yeah,
the stuff
same here.
now,
Yeah,
I'm like, what's going on now? This is the worst written crap I've ever
yeah.
seen.
I was 12 when I first saw Star Wars, and it was incredible. I'd never seen anything like it in my
Yeah.
life. So I mean,
But
and
it
I still
changed
love it, but
film.
like,
You know,
yeah.
it changed film, and now
No, it
because it
changed
changed
American.
film.
Let's get this correct. It changed
Mhm.
American film because what
Okay.
happened with American film was American film was getting very gritty. You had like the
Charles
Clint East,
Bronson.
yeah, and the Clint
Yeah.
Eastwood movies,
Yeah.
and you had stuff like Straw Dogs and whatever else.
Mhm.
Okay, so you had a lot of really good gritty American cinema, and
Kinda anti-hero.
that changes after Star Wars. So
Damn it, Star Wars.
yeah, but again, I mean,
I like Charles Bronson.
yeah, those Death Wish. Well, to be fair with you, the guy who actually
Death
directed
Wish
the Death
7.
Yeah, the guy who directed the Death Wish films is actually British. He's a guy called Michael Winner. So,
Woohoo!
so there we go. But we still had, I think we always had auteurs and whatever else in the cinema. And, from UK, we had people like Derek Jarman and Ken Russell and things. And Anger is one of the auteurs of, um, of American cinema because
Right.
without Anger, really, there was a thing a few years ago. Do I think so? Maybe so. There was something that said that basically Anger invented MTV or the music video.
Really?
Oh yeah,
Interesting. Because
because
of his nonverbal,
yep,
musical
yep,
orientated films?
absolutely.
Well, and
So
he's working with musicians.
yeah, that's the other thing. Yeah. So he's working with people like Mick Jagger, Jimmy Page, Bobby Beausoleil, and all those kind of people.
Mhm.
So yeah, he's the original, you know, music video
I want
person.
my
We'll say.
MTV.
Yeah, effectively.
Well, and MTV's all shot to heck now. It's like it's not. I don't. I don't. Does it even exist? I don't know. I know their
I'm
websites.
not sure
I
if
don't
it's.
know. I
I'm
don't
sure it
even know.
must do in some form or another.
Yeah, is there
But yeah, I
something
mean, but
probably echoing out there?
yeah, I mean, again, this is the thing we have to remember. It's the fact that cinema changes a lot of things, and Angers was one of the forefronts of these. I mean, he made his first film in 1947, and so because of that, he was doing something very very different. He's part of what was called an underground cinema scene in the US. So there were people like Curtis Harrington and Jack Smith and those kind of people who are all part of this scene, who are now sort of being held up as being saviors of American cinema in some way, and being the influence of whoever, certainly people like Tarantino, I think, has cited those three as being an influence on him. You wouldn't get that from Lucas or Spielberg, but like I think Tarantino did. Um, you look at a very very different aspect. These are people that were taking French and German art house cinema and making it American. And I think that's really, really fundamentally important because they would, even though they were still working within a Hollywood system or, certainly working within California, um, they were changing the way cinema was. And this would influence, again, a bit later, people like Andy Warhol to make films, etc., etc., etc. So these are people at the forefront of that experimental cinema within that period of time coming from America. Maya Deren is another one. I don't know if you've ever heard of Maya Deren.
I have not.
Maya Deren is a wonderful, wonderful American a movie maker. She made this brilliant, beautiful, brilliant film called Meshes in the Afternoon, and she made quite a few other movies after that, short films after that. So incredible American filmmaker. She should be being held up as being one of the icons of female icons of American film, just purely because she pushed all those boundaries. Absolutely, she went beyond, beyond, beyond. So and incredible, incredible filmmaker. So
Mhm.
watch
So
anyone here watch some Maya Deren films because they are incredible,
the
incredible
there's
pieces of cinema.
there's obviously a difference between art films and the people who are running that and the system. Are they parallel? Do they ever meet? Like, does the system ever say, "Hey, come make an art film"? Like, I think,
Yeah.
was there ever a part where art film was big and pushed by studios, or
Okay. I think what studios did was they took elements of art films and then made it
Okay,
their own. And
okay.
certainly within, I mean, again, if you look at as I said, mentioned earlier on, the Universal horror movies, they take German expressionism and then put
One of
that
my
on
favorite
screen.
My favorite is German expressionism. I love what Germany and the
Yeah.
Weimar Republic, I love what they were doing.
I mean, if you look at Son of Frankenstein, the film with Basil Rathbone, Boris Karloff, and Bela Lugosi, the set design in that is German expressionism. I
Yes.
mean, James Whale, who was a British director who made Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein, again uses German expressionism in both those. But really, really, in Son of Frankenstein, if you look at that movie, there's a hell of a lot of German expressionism within that movie. Again, film noir uses German expressionism, so a lot of the whole American sort of crime movies of that era uses a hell of they use a hell of a lot of German expressionism within their movies. In fact, actually, probably as a thing, film noir wouldn't exist without German expressionism. And you got to remember they
Mhm.
had people like Edgar J. Ulmer and all those kind of people come over and make those sort of movies in the States. So
Yeah.
you know,
Well, so back to a lot of the gossip and a lot of the stuff, and obviously we're agreeing that a lot of abuse is happening in the system. How has that affected society? Like, I find that we're actually not because of the art house films, but because of the mainstream system, I'm finding it's actually made society more narcissistic and sick.
yeah, I think that's true. I think there was always an element of it there, but I think what we've got now is, I mean, we've got a system where everyone, there's the old Andy Warhol thing of 15 minutes of fame, all that kind of thing. And I think we're more in a state of that now, probably for being 5 minutes of fame. But I think that's very true because we're everywhere. People are everywhere now. I mean, it's one of those things where you can be famous. I mean, I know that there's people on, I don't know, I heard about someone today on YouTube that had 3 million followers. Never heard of them before. I don't know what they do or anything like that. So again, it's that narcissism that builds up, and suddenly, they're getting asked to do this, they'll get asked to do that, and I have no idea what their talent is, to be fair with you. And I think the difference being between the the system as we used to know it, Hollywood system as we used to know it, was at least then you had to have some degree of talent. I mean, you had
Right.
actors that were actors
Singers who
and
could
not
sing.
personalities, you know.
Yeah.
So you had directors who were directors and not video game directors. Um,
Right.
it's so I think the whole thing has changed, and unfortunately, what we're going to get is ever decreasing, returns on everything that Hollywood
Yeah.
produces. And
There's, like, a really limited template now. It's like hero movie or comic book superhero movie, comic book superhero movie.
yeah,
Once in a while, you'll get something like, they're coming out with a remake of Nosferatu. You might get
yeah, yeah,
something
yeah,
like that, but comic book superhero movies, I'm
yeah.
kinda getting sick of them. It's like, okay,
But
we've beaten Star Wars to death.
even the Eggers Nosferatu, I was hoping it would be at least slightly expressionist. I saw the trailer for it,
Mhm.
and it was still wham bam, jump cut
Jump
sort of
scare.
crap. Yeah, and it's kind of like, okay, oh, yeah. Will I go and see it at the cinema? Mm,
You know,
maybe
I
if
think
maybe if I'm bored enough.
I was,
To be fair,
really I think it's why I was really impressed with Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula. Because I like the stylism that he did and it's in the
yeah,
'90s. He did it, I mean, CGI in those days was not very good anyways, but he did it without all those tricks. He was all on camera, all old
mm,
school, and I really liked that movie. It may not be exactly to the novel, it may have some twists and new plot stuff, but stylized wise, I thought, yeah, he's actually trying to be creative a little bit here.
yeah. Okay, I have to say one thing about that. I saw it at the cinema. I didn't like it at the time.
Uh-oh.
And then it was only 2 or 3 years ago. I rewatched it because I went up to Whitby and I thought, oh, it'd be good to
Oh,
rewatch it.
nice.
I'd not seen it in years, and so got the DVD, got a DVD cheap somewhere and watched it, and it was as bad as I remembered it being. To be fair,
Oh,
I
what was it?
really
Can I
just
ask
didn't.
what you didn't like about it? Like,
Anthony Hopkins dreadful in it for starters. I
He was
think
kind of crazy. He kind of was crazy Dutchman, fake Dutchman.
um, I like some of the things. I mean, Keanu Reeves' British accent was
Keanu
dreadful.
Reeves awful.
Oh,
I
yeah.
didn't like him.
Um,
I
you know,
think I like the style of it, the
yeah.
stylized
There's
thing
some
that
nice
he did.
bits and pieces. There's some nice set pieces in it, but it just doesn't. Tom Waits again being a crazy guy in the asylum kind of thing is a bit. Oh God, really? Please,
It's
At
funny.
least Dwight, at least Dwight Fry did it properly in the 31
Yeah,
Dracula. You know, uh, yeah. For some
it's
reason
okay.
it just didn't hit home.
I don't really
It was
watch
neither
it
fish nor fowl.
anymore. Maybe if I watched it again, I won't like it. I probably like the love story element too because I was a
Mm.
teenage girl. But
Yeah, I think
I find
that's the big thing. Big selling
yeah,
point was probably I
um,
travel through
there's
time
a
for
lot
your
of
love.
stuff that I used to listen to that I can't listen to music anymore. Like
Mm.
I used to listen to Depeche Mode and Nine Inch Nails. If I put that on now, I get so depressed. And I'm like, what's going on? And I realize that these were all like crazy drug addict, suicidal people, and they're putting it
Mm.
in their songs. And I'm just like, I used to love this stuff. No wonder I was depressed as a
Well, someone a few weeks ago to me called Depeche Mode depressed mode, which
I
I thought was
accidentally said that the other day, and I said depressed mode. I mean Depeche Mode. I'm like, yeah, well, it actually is depressing.
yeah.
They're
But I
depressing.
mean, again, I mean, movies will always go in cycles, and I mean,
Hmm.
unfortunately, horror films suffer more than probably any
Hmm.
other kind of form of cinema uh,
Yeah,
of being, how can I put it, trying to keep up. And again, that's what happened with things like Hammer
yeah.
and even in the Universal things where Universal monsters went from being scary to being Abbott and Costello.
Well,
So
here's the irony for me, like with horror movies, to be afraid, it requires a certain amount of mystery.
mm,
And you can't if you're having horror movies all the time and that's your main thing, eventually it's going to lose that mystery because you're kind
yeah,
of
yeah,
overexposed to it.
yeah,
That's why Halloween time is at Halloween time and you don't have it every single day of the year.
yeah.
Right?
And I
Like
love
I don't
Halloween
know.
time.
It's I do too. But like they're totally missing what makes things scary today.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm never scared of horror movies, and I don't like like slasher horror movies. I don't like those. I don't want to watch Jason kill someone 500 different ways
mm,
for 15 movies. That's
no,
like I'm like ew.
yeah. It becomes
And
pointless. But again, I mean, but that's the same thing that Hollywood always does. We have one good idea, like with Halloween and whatever else, and what they do is then they just absolutely bleed it to death. I mean, they did the same with the Universal monsters back in the day, and basically all people like Michael Myers and Jason and Freddy became, was the equivalent of the Universal monsters.
yeah,
Because all
become
they did was
ridiculous.
that they kind of took away their mystery and they took away their, I don't know, something evil about them, and then made them
Yeah,
this sort of sanitized versions of them.
silly.
So suddenly we have to have a
That's
backstory for,
marketing for you though.
yeah,
Marketing, when that's how marketing goes. Like it happens with any product. If it's jeans, you'll have them really expensive and they'll be nicely tailored and there won't be as many of
mm,
them. And as it goes through the market, it gets cheaper and cheaper and crazier until you have thousands of them sitting at Costco.
yeah.
It's
I,
isn't like
I,
it seems to be the
yeah,
process.
I understand. People want more product. I totally get that, and but I do think again we what we're doing is we're getting that thing from Hollywood that comes again from, it didn't really happen in the 20s, but certainly happened in the 30s.
Mhm.
Um, that you're getting this sort of regurgitation of ideas and whatever else, and reselling the same product again and again and again and again. You got to remember that Dracula made more money for Universal movies and for Universal Studios than pretty much any other movie that year. In fact, it broke box
Yeah.
office records.
Yes.
So they obviously saw it as a cash cow, and the same with Freddy, Jason, Michael Myers. The Scream
Yeah.
films is another point. The whole Wes Craven idea of those Scream films was to take the pee out of horror movies, and then it ends up becoming as big a sort of franchise as the movies it was meant to be, sort of like, it just sort of put, taking the Mickey from. And we become in this weird sort of system of like, well, how does that happen? But that
Yeah.
happens all the time. Star Wars, Indiana Jones. We've got CGI Harrison Ford now, I think, isn't it the last one? I can't remember. But
Mm. I can't. It's like, Harrison, hang your hat up. Like, I didn't
well, I
even
think you'd
watch
have to
that
hang
last
his
Indiana
CGI.
Jones.
I think you have
Yeah.
to hang his CGI hat up now, because
Well, that
I don't
last
think he's
I didn't
actually there,
even
probably, apart
watch.
from doing a voiceover.
I didn't even watch that last Indiana Jones movie. I had seen the one before, and you could tell he didn't have the same energy. It just wasn't the same, and I was like, yeah, no.
Hmm,
And so when that one came out, nah, all the Star Wars stuff I don't watch. The only one I went and subscribed to Disney to for a month was to watch the Obi-Wan Kenobi one, and that was okay.
hmm,
But the rest of them, they get so convoluted. A lot of this stuff, that literally the original myth and how it's set up in Star Wars, they literally contradict it.
hmm.
They contradict the point
Oh
of
yeah,
Anakin being the
absolutely.
chosen
Yeah,
one. Like, they contradict.
yeah,
I'm like, what a bunch of garbage. Who's writing this?
yeah,
Someone from
yeah, yeah, yeah.
fanfiction.net?
Yeah, yeah, and
you
that
know?
probably is actually.
And that's
The
our
thing is,
society. That's our society. We contradict everything
yeah,
that freedom, democracy is supposed to be built on, and that's what's
but
happening.
again, what we're building up again is a new lot of heroes. But when you build up heroes, who they're going to be again, like as in the Hollywood
Flimsy
Babylon, where he
heroes?
points out, we build that up and then we bring them down again. I mean, at the moment, like in the music industry, Taylor Swift is the goddess of whatever music, and
Yes.
there's already rumors going around that she's actually the daughter of Zena LaVey, who's the daughter of Anta
Yeah.
LaVey from the Church of Satan.
I don't think
So
so.
because she looks very much like her.
I was actually friends with Zena LaVey's son, Stanton LaVey, who
Mm,
recent on Facebook used to be. He recently passed away, and he had grown up basically with a grandfather, and
mm,
so she only had him. She didn't. That's so ridiculous.
yeah,
Yeah,
and so we're at a point where we kind of reality blurs yet again, because we're
yeah,
looking at things and then suddenly this will become a fact. I mean, I know Nicholas Schreck, who's was Zena's husband,
yep,
and
yep,
obviously, obviously Taylor Swift is not his child or their
no,
child, and
yeah,
you know, it's so we're going through a kind of a whole thing again, and again, like, this is what Anger deals with in Hollywood Babylon. This is what Anger dealt with in a weird way in his movies. You know, he would pull in people to sort of be in his films who were kind of almost really quite on the borderlines of being unpopular. Anais Nin, the author, is in one of his movies. And so he sort of plays around with that sort of blurring between the famous and the infamous, and
right.
there are two different things, and sometimes they cross over like this, and that's what
Mhm.
happens. That's what happens with everyone. I mean, if you go back, I don't know, 10 years or so ago, probably Katy Perry was the flavor of the month, and she's in a
Yes.
little bit in the "Where Are They Now" file. I don't know if she's still big in the States or whatever else, but here she's a bit like that. Um, so again,
Well,
we're doing the whole thing the same way as a Hollywood system. It still works the same way. You
there,
build people up, you
there
knock them down, and you push them
there
aside.
is this concept that in, like, Hollywood, they want to invert anything good. Like, so, like, Katy Perry, let's take it. She was very Christian. There's a lot of girls who start out that they target girls who are, like, from Christian backgrounds or gospel singers, so they can sort of invert them and do things
Mm.
against Christianity and make them depraved. It wouldn't surprise me, because there's a lot of weird people in Hollywood, but
Well, she
there's this
married Russell
idea that
Brand, who's
yeah.
notorious in the UK. To be fair with you.
Well, you know what? I mean, she's kind of crazy too. She's married to, what's his name now? and with a kid, and she admitted that she played games, and basically narcissistic games. Like, a lot of
Mm.
these girls aren't stable either, and then of course they marry unstable people. I think Russell's a little more stable now, but I mean, he's Russell Brand. I think,
Yeah,
like,
he's.
he's Russell Brand, right? Like, he's a little. I can't listen to him for too long. I watch his podcast. He's too. Sometimes he's too much for me.
Yeah,
But like,
I
my
don't know
whole
if he's
point,
I don't know if he's ever been very stable, to be honest with you.
yeah, my whole point is that there's something really weird about processing. Like, it's like Hollywood isn't there for our best intentions. It's
No,
actually
no.
there to
Yeah,
invert goodness. That's the idea that a lot of people have
but
now.
look. Hollywood is there to entertain you, and you're either entertained by Hollywood or you're not. And if you're not, there's it's like the TV. If you don't like a TV show, change your channel, switch the off button. Okay?
I don't know.
Hol-
I think
no,
people
no,
are
no.
hypnotized by it.
Hollywood is the thing of like, if you want to see a movie, go and see a movie. If you don't, you don't. That's it.
Right.
You know.
So you don't
Um,
think that there's propaganda from agencies in Hollywood? Like, there's a lot
oh,
of CIA
oh,
money in
oh,
it and
yeah,
everything.
There's, I mean, obviously, there's always been money coming in from various places you know, since Hollywood began, because otherwise Hollywood wouldn't
Mhm.
have financed itself. But
Yeah,
you've got to
that's
remember, like
that's my point.
Hollywood had
Yeah,
massive flops, and still does today. They've invested loads of money in certain movies that are totally bombed, and then have to recuperate it somewhere else down the line. I mean, Universal were on the brink of folding until when Dracula was released in 1931.
yeah,
Dracula saved that company from going under. So and so did Frankenstein, the Boris Karloff
yes,
Frankenstein.
yes, yes.
Those two films literally saved Universal Pictures from going under. So what we're I think that's always going to be the way with Hollywood. I mean,
Mhm.
I think the one thing is that Hollywood's actually, I think, begun to lose touch with what people want in some respects, maybe. But again,
Well, it's the woke
it's
stuff.
yeah,
They're
yeah,
pushing woke stuff
yeah,
that's not
absolutely,
entertaining.
yeah, yeah. And most people are now kind of bored with all that whole thing. And the thing is, Hollywood will always react now rather than be proactive. Whereas cinema used to be a proactive thing where you push people to boundaries, okay, and
Yeah.
then people would follow that. Again, same with music would be, like
Okay. Yeah.
you got to remember the Beatles, Sergeant Pepper. Wow, my God, nothing else happened.
Well,
Suddenly, within 6 months, there was, 1,000 bands all copying Sergeant Pepper, for instance. So I'd use that as an analogy for that. Um, Now, what it's doing is, rather than, because it's frightened to be proactive, it's being reactive. And then what happens with that is then it falls behind the times all the time, and so it
mhm.
plays catch up with itself. And
Well, that's a
that's
really good point.
Yeah, and that's the big problem. As soon as you start playing catch up with yourself, you're always going to be on a losing streak, because suddenly now people are bored of that. Whereas 2 years ago, 3 years ago, yeah, we want this and we want that. Now
Right.
people
So
don't
they're
want that
they're
anymore.
not
So
really innovative anymore.
no, 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 absolutely not. I
So
can't I can't remember the last
I
really
think
truly innovative film that Hollywood or the American picture industry like that has produced. The last few films I saw at the cinema were done by, again, mainly independent people, which I still think there's an interest on, and there's still some people making interesting movies in the independent sphere. And I hate to have to say it, but the last few films I probably saw at the cinema were done by European directors who are still making good independent films.
right.
Um, there's a film that's going to be released in the next month, which is the new Quay Brothers film, and I've seen the trailers for it. So far, it looks spectacular. It's an incredible piece of work that took them 5 years to
It's
make, or whatever else.
it's
You know,
on the Cray brothers or by the Cray
no,
brothers?
no, it's by the Quay Brothers,
Cray brothers.
and
Okay.
yeah, and it's
Um.
so it's being sort of,
So
it's in film festivals at the moment.
the studio seems to be obviously being cautious with their money, but everything seems to be templated. And I have an issue with the people that are. It feels like they have an agenda that's beyond entertainment now. They're like, oh,
Yeah.
every men are going to dress up in dresses now, and the actors don't feel like they're exploring. They feel like it feels like the studio's telling them, here's what we're going to do, and you're going to do this on the red carpet, or you're going to show up and do this. It's highly scripted. It's really rigid, and the actors just look blah. Like I'm like where are the real actors that lived as real people and are
Mm,
now they're not there. They're not like, actors like, I mean, rugged real actors. I don't know. They just seem fake little boys. Like I
mm.
find the actors just really unappealing today. There's something wrong.
Okay, again, I'll bring it back to Anger here for a second. I mean, Anger was a gay man, and
Mhm.
you know, his films, apart from one film, maybe two, yeah, probably two films, out of all the movies he made, um, you could watch his films and you wouldn't sort of think to yourself, this is made by a gay man. He's not forcing that sort of attitude down at your throat. He's basically making movies, and he's making movies in very much, sometimes a very traditional Hollywood fashion, very much a silent movie fashion. He's is he making statements? Yes, he is making statements probably for the people that know about certain films, well, the subject matter of certain films of his. But apart from Fireworks, which is his first film that he made when I think he was only about 18 or something like that when he first made that, and a film called Scorpio Rising, he really doesn't say, he doesn't make that statement in a strange way.
Right.
And that's an interesting thing. I mean, he comes from an underground perspective and whatever else, but he's not. I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of people probably
Well,
see some of his bigger films, like Inauguration of the Pleasure Dome, for instance, and don't think, oh, this is a film made by a gay man, because this is
there's
very
for
much a
me, it's one thing if one person makes a statement and exploring something because that's what they want to do. It doesn't even feel, it feels like the studio's rolling out something and everybody just has to jump to it. It
hmm,
doesn't feel like someone's making a creative statement. It feels like people are just doing stuff for attention and attention only,
yeah,
not for a creative statement.
yeah. No, I kind of agree with that. I mean, I think whatever Anger and those people who were part of that sort of experimental underground scene of American cinema at that time were doing were, yes, they were making statements, but also they were doing it because they loved film, and that's the
Yes.
difference. I don't think a lot of the filmmakers today love film. I think they're. I mean, I studied film obviously at university. I have a postgraduate degree in film, and
Hmm.
you meet a lot of people now who kind of don't even can't even reference things 50 years ago. So Star Wars, for instance, or whatever it
Yeah.
is, kind of thing. It's beyond a thing. The sort of the scope is really narrow about what they're looking at. When is was cinema is such a beautiful breadth of things that's
It's
all
vast.
encompassing. It's vast. I mean, apart from the Hollywood American movies, you got vast waves of cinema from France, Germany, even Russia and whatever else. You know, throughout the world, India makes some incredible movies. Um, you're looking at something that's very small, and I think we're in a position where we kind of always look towards. It's like if we only look towards this one place that's sort of kind of dictating to what we're doing, we're still
It's
forgetting that there's,
centralized.
yeah, we're still forgetting that there's still a vast amount of cinema out there that that is being made by different. I mean, you got to remember even when people like Truffaut and Godard were making films in France, they were very
Mhm.
different from the stuff that was being made in America at that time, which was kind of still very much, some moralistic family tales. Goddard and Truffaut would never have gone for a moralistic family tale. They
Mhm.
actually probably would have had difficulty making a tale, to be fair. Pasolini in Italy, these kind of people, there'll always be mavericks, and to be fair, Orson Welles is a prime example again of someone from the States who's making different sorts of movies.
Right.
There'll always be these mavericks who make movies, and and Whereas Anger will hold up in Hollywood Babylon that sort of mirror towards this is what the big systems are doing. He's part of another system that's kind of saying to you, but look over here. Look, because
Right.
there's all this cinema over here. There's all these wonderful films. There's all this wonderful
Hmm.
culture of film that's over here that can be explored, and you'll suddenly your world will, will sort of blossom tenfold within that. And that's what cinema can do at its best. And that's even within American cinema as well. When it's at its best, it can do that. Unfortunately, I don't know what it's like in the States, but here we don't tend to get a lot of that kind of cinema very much anymore from America
No.
that kind of pushes those sort
So
of boundaries.
my husband took me a few months ago. We went to Salt Lake City, and every Thursday and Friday they do a silent film movie. And the guy who they put it on, and they have a guy, he's got to be 90. He
Mm.
plays the original silent film organ
Oh,
right with the
wonderful.
movie. They have all the
Yeah.
effects. We went to that. It was, and they try to do films that were made in the 20s that were in Utah, filmed in
Mm.
Utah. So it's a lot of cowboys and Indians, and it was a love story. And it was fun because they tell you, okay, you got to be like old school. You can't just watch passively. They're like in silent films, people used to cheer and everything in the audience. So we
Yeah,
were
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah,
oh, yeah, it was totally different experience
yeah,
than
yeah.
any film I'd been. But yeah, we went and saw a silent film with the whole get up and the sound effects and how they used to do it in the 1920s. It was really
Well,
cool.
a few years ago, I on Halloween, strange enough, I went to see Murnau's Nosferatu, and that was done with a live. This was in a church in a graveyard. Okay, so we had to go
Mm-hmm.
walk through the graveyard to get to this church, and the accompaniment was played on an organ, the church organ kind of thing.
Yeah.
Fantastic, absolutely wonderful, and it kind of gave you. I mean, not only was it an experience to walk through a graveyard to a church in the middle of sort of nowhere to watch Nosferatu, but yeah, it was just an experience, and those things can still happen, and I think that
Yeah.
silent cinema still has a lot to offer us, and I think
I'm
the
going to,
more we sort of delve into it, the better.
I have a quick little video that I'm going to share that I put
Okay.
up on TikTok of it, just so you guys can see what it was like. A silent film thing. Okay, here we go. Do we got that? No, we didn't want to share that. That's stop sharing. Let's let's try that one again. I shared the wrong screen. I shared my Twitter screen instead of TikTok. Here we go. Okay, so here it is. I put it up on. You guys can see that. Let's tap this and go like that. So this gives you a little taste of what it was like. So we had an amazing experience in Salt Lake City to see a silent film that was filmed in Utah in the 1920s, and it was accompanied by the silent film organ, an original organ from back in the 1920s. And I believe it's one of the last organs around. There's not very many of them. And the gentleman who's playing, is one of the very few, organists that do this kind of silent film playing left. There's not very many of them around. So I hope you enjoy this little clip, and if you ever get to go and see something like this in your city, check it out. Oh, she's the villain. Uh-oh. So that was it. That
Yeah.
was that was part of the film. It was actually fun. The seats
Again,
weren't very good.
at the BFI in London, they still do silent movies with live accompaniment like that. Sometimes
Nice.
I actually saw Pandora's Box with a live accompaniment to it.
Oh,
So I mean,
wow.
you do get that, and again, it does add to the whole thing, because that's how people would have seen it back in the day. So
Yeah.
you know, and,
And
and yeah,
it's kind of like you said, like Kenneth Anger It's there's some text, but it's mostly film that with no verbiage and no
There's no
script.
dialogue in any of Anger's
No, no
films.
dialogue,
And
sorry.
again, that's what's an influence because with my films personally, I don't use dialogue at all in any of my films, and I think that's you know you can say a lot with images, and I think the important thing again with silent cinema was the fact of you can show a lot because you're not with a lot of talkies films, especially they use like an exegesis of people sort of telling you what you're going to see and doing whatever else. In silent cinema, that doesn't happen. And again,
Fantastic.
I like the idea of actors being mute.
So we've been about an hour and a half. Did Kenneth Anger have any sort of warnings about Hollywood? Did he feel anything bad about it, or he just accepted it as it was, or does his
He
books give us kind of a warning?
No, his books do give us a warning. He loved and loathed Hollywood at the same time. I mean, he felt that Hollywood was brought up, and without it, he wouldn't have made films, which I
Mhm,
think is a very important thing because he was definitely a film lover, and that's the thing you always get from Anger is the fact of like he loved movies,
mhm.
and and his films are made because he loved films, and so he was definitely you kind of don't really get a warning like that, but what you do with Hollywood Babylon, it shows you the underbelly of what it is. Because for all those glitz and glamour, for all the wonderful things, and including stuff that happened within Anger's own life as well, for his films, there's some glitz and glamour on the screen, and
And
then
there's some drama behind the scenes too, I'm sure.
there's lots of drama behind it. I mean, I do a talk on the making of one of his films that I split
Yes.
into two talks because literally there's so many things that go on, including death, doom, disaster, imprisonment, the Manson family, you name it, everything. And I had to split the talk into two halves, like over 2 nights, because of um, otherwise it'd just be too long. I mean, I talk for over an hour on both on both parts of it, and yeah, there's so much that goes on behind the scenes with even with his films. But that's what again makes movies great. That's what I think he understood the fact of what we see is this facade, this glitz and glamour, but underneath that there'll always be, and there will always be the tawdry whatever side of 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 any type of fame. And you can take
Mhm.
that from your television stars that have been found out, your rap stars that are up for whatever else, your
Oh,
politicians.
and shit is going down in America, like, people it's like
Yeah,
revelation time, man.
yeah.
It is crazy.
And again, there'll always be that for wherever there's glitz and there's glamour, there'll always be an underbelly of that. I mean, again, we have all that with the even with our royal family in the UK, who are
Of
I'm not a
course.
fan of anyway.
And
Um,
and a mythology around them as well, I'm sure.
yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, where there's fame, there'll always be a mythology. And again, that's one of the things that Anger always recognized. He recognized that if he built his own mythology, that would become probably bigger than him, actually bigger than his films, which he was right about. At the end of the day, I mean, I met him on quite a few occasions. So here's my one of my signed. He wanted to sign
Wow,
this
and
in gold
he just
to
passed away
me.
last year.
Yeah, yeah. He wanted to sign this in
Beautiful.
gold for me. So there's one of
Oh,
his things he signed
fantastic.
for me. Um, I met him a few times, and every time I saw him speak or talk about things, he he would add a story,
Yeah.
and he was a great storyteller, but he was a great Hollywood storyteller because what he would do was he would say, "Well, I met Dietrich, I met this man, blah 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 blah, whatever else." Were those stories true? I don't know. None of us were there, so we only have Anger's word to go by it. But seeing as he was such a great self mythologizer, 50-50 maybe some of these things were true, maybe some of them weren't. And that doesn't matter. it doesn't matter whether those stories were true or not. It's the fact of, did they entertain you for that night? Did he
Mhm.
tell a tale if you're sitting around a table with him and he would tell you something? Would that entertain you for an evening? Absolutely. And isn't
Right.
really that's what cinema and isn't that
So,
what Hollywood is meant to be all about?
well, I've been told that culture and society needs myths to exist, whether it's myths
Oh,
about George Washington
yeah,
or Winston Churchill, but they
yeah,
need mythology to survive.
yeah,
You also need facts and logic, but if you pull apart your mythologies, your societies will be damaged.
yeah,
But
absolutely. I mean,
do you think that it's important as well? Like, there's a sense of surreality about films. Do you think it's important for people to, like, I think a lot of people forget that film is not reality, and I think people need to be in reality a little bit more, and they seem to be immersing themselves in fantasy too much,
okay,
maybe?
yeah.
I don't
All
know.
right. Yeah, yeah. I'll give you an example for my own stupidity here. Um, um, when I was younger, and I saw the film The Lost Boys at the cinema when it came out, and I can't remember how old
Oh,
I
yeah.
was. I was a teenager or whatever else. Oddly
Mhm.
enough, I met a person, an American woman. I was chatting to her, and she came. She was playing in bands in the States, and she still does things and whatever else. And she came from sort of California area, and I actually believed, and this is how stupid I was, that the name of the place mentioned in Lost Boys, Santa Carla, was an actual place. I thought, oh, that must be a real place. It's got a real name, and obviously,
Yeah.
apparently, it isn't. There isn't a place called that
It's,
at all.
it's a different name. It's
Yeah,
Santa
it's
something, but it's not Santa
something. Yeah,
Carla.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. No, I remember saying. I think she probably thought, "God, what a dumbass he is." I kind of actually
Mhm.
took it all on board and sort of thought to myself, "Oh," and there was obviously no things like internet at the time for me to go and check to see if it
Yeah.
was or wasn't real. I mean, I knew that various other places in movies weren't real, but yeah, for some reason I
Well,
kind of because it seemed so real in the film.
oh,
But
we can
that's
get our emotions locked up in things that aren't real, and we can
yeah, yeah,
actually let
yeah.
it dictate how we operate in the
But
world.
also there's almost then a fantasy of like then you want to believe it's real, if that makes sense. Because hey,
Or
that's
you
a
wanna
cool
dress
place.
up
That's a
as
cool
Darth
thing. That's
Vader.
it. Yeah, yeah. And to be fair with you, me and my friends went to see the Lost Boys at the cinema at the time. We probably actually looked pretty much close to the Lost Boys, to be fair,
Yeah, no,
with
that
our,
that was a
their
that was a big
hairstyles and
style.
gothic look and whatever else. So, but,
Sometimes art imitates life, imitates art, imitates
yeah,
life. It's a
and
cycle.
yeah, I guess there's a kind of a thing of like you sometimes people want to believe and they want to believe too much, and and that's a good thing. I mean, if cinema can create again, cinema's done what it's always done, which is from the very beginning, which is from the Sun era on. It creates gods and goddesses, new gods and goddesses. Um, I was watching earlier on, and it's a film I don't remember seeing, but I obviously saw many, many, many years ago, and I can't really remember it. River of No Return with Marilyn Monroe in, and they were showing
Mm.
it a little bit earlier on today on British television. And you see Marilyn Monroe and go, oh God, obviously people thought she was a goddess. She was incredible,
Of
beautiful.
course.
She liked the screen. Hey,
But that's
but why
fake.
not? Yeah, and
I
sometimes
I I totally disciplined. Like, I used to like Mark Hamill. I can't stand him now. Every time I see him on Twitter, I want to punch him. I'm like, Melissa, this is a lesson to not idolize actors and just
yeah,
enjoy the movie and walk the fuck away. Excuse me.
yeah, 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 absolutely. But I mean, I think, but again, I don't think we make actors like we did before. I can't think of an actress now that is the equivalent of Monroe or
No.
whatever. So I mean,
Yeah.
I'm a big
But
fan of
and
the
and
French actress Beatrice
again,
Starr.
another tragic story, and a lot of
Yeah, yeah,
these
yeah,
girls are from
yeah,
orphanages. They have,
yeah,
they're promiscuous because they have traumatic backgrounds, and the
yeah,
system takes advantage of that.
yeah, yeah.
It's sad.
So I mean, yeah. Again, but if there's a line in the film Blade Runner where the guy says, you have a short life, but that it burns so brightly. Sometimes maybe that's the thing. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe
I'm steady and even kind of person. I'm like, yeah, let's keep going.
Yeah, I'm
But
getting into
I'm
my
like, I'm
Frau
going to
dotage
bed.
now.
It's 9 o'clock. I'm
Yeah.
tired. I
I'm getting
can't
into
even
my
have
Frau
my
dotage now.
glass, a couple of glasses of wine anymore. It makes me sick. I'm like, oh, damn it. So I don't know. I guess, yeah, that's the kind of myth that's there about Hollywood. Burn
Mm.
that candle brightly at both
But
ends. But
I mean, to be fair, if someone gave you $100 tomorrow and sort of said, look, even if you don't like the Rolling Stones,
eh,
would you prefer to see the Rolling Stones in 1969 or the Rolling Stones now? Come on, you're
I'd
gonna
say
gonna go. You're gonna want to go and see them back when they were
1969. I
vibrant,
don't want to see them
whatever.
now. I don't want to see.
Yeah,
Well, no, I would see. No, I probably. You know what? I don't even like being around lots of people. I'd probably be like,
yeah.
oh
I mean,
shit.
to be fair, I'm not a fan of the Stones, but is
Yeah,
that thing of you want to see these people when that they're most vibrant and they're most
yeah.
and again, like, hey, sometimes maybe people are not meant to, people can burn out quickly, and they don't have to die
Well,
to do that, but like maybe it's just
I
part
will
of what
end it, but I
happens.
think a lot of people are getting tired of the depravity and they just want to see some morals back and some, respect back for human beings. And they're tired of hearing Diddy and like there's possibility that he was involved in scenario and Michael Jackson was murdered. They're tired of hearing all this crazy stuff and it makes them
Yeah.
depressed.
Mm.
They're like, can we have some level of decency? Does everybody have to get naked and have sex in films all the time? Like what's really happening behind it, and people are like, what's really going on? There's like sex parties, there's child trafficking, like all this
Mm.
stuff is being wrapped into this, and I think people are starting to get disillusioned and depressed,
Yeah.
and that's how I feel about Hollywood. It's making me depressed. It's not, I
Mm.
don't feel like, oh wow, so amazing and I want to watch this stuff, it's so magical. I just don't feel that way about it
But
now.
basically, what Hollywood, the thing is, and again, what Anger does in Hollywood Babylon is the fact of in those days you got that mirror, that sort of thing, that Hollywood was this, but behind that mirror there was always going to be something else. And what's
Mhm.
happened is that has become a blurred thing where now
Yeah,
that side of the mirror has come forward, and
there we go.
whereas
I love
these
it.
people were crystal clean entertainment, Fred Astaire,
Hmm.
Gene Kelly, da 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 da, da it would always be held up as that, Chaplin included.
Yeah,
Eventually, what's happened now is the fact of like we're getting to that
it's all.
murky thing where we're not entertaining anymore, but we're airing our dirty laundry, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Well, I want to thank you for coming on, Gary. I'm going to wrap it up. You gave me an hour and 40 minutes. I really appreciate it. That was really wonderful. Are you working on any projects? Are you still
yeah,
going with the film
yeah,
or lectures?
I'm working on a new short film at the moment that I'm trying to finish, which is taking me a while. I need to do a couple more shoots for it. I've done 2 or 3 shoots already for it. I've got a couple of lectures coming up, again, both in the UK. One which is sold out, which is a witchcraft documentaries in the 1970s talk, and I'm doing a
Nice.
talk at the end of October, and that's on a thing called the Highgate Vampire, which was a
Oh,
something that
wow. That's
happened.
fascinating.
Oh, it was a thing that happened in the UK in about 19 between 1968 and 1970.
Yes.
It caused a media furore and ended up bleeding into sort of British culture, including films like Hammer horror films, etc. But yeah,
Nice.
it was a thing that was that we had people going to the cemetery who thought they were modern day at the time Van Helsings and goodness knows what
Oh,
else
well,
doing
maybe we'll
vampire
have
hunts.
to talk
It's
about that in the
it's
future.
it was a total media furore that would have only happened at that time in the UK, and
Right.
but it includes so many different aspects that were kind of some of them are now just like how did you go? How were they doing that? What were they doing with this? And that carried on, and it sort of bled through into the early '80s a bit as well. But this big peak moment was between 1968 and about 1971, when it was just an absolute furore of these things of, I mean, including newspapers and whatever else going to the cemetery to try and catch a picture of the Highgate vampire, etc., etc. But it was but it didn't do that because it included then it all it did was attract the attention of things like black magic groups and goodness knows whatever else going to the cemetery and doing various things there. So yeah, I'm doing a talk on that, and that's on the Monday the 28th, I think, of October. So just before Halloween, I'm doing that, and that's in London.
Nice.
And
That's
it's the
fantastic.
first time I've done this talk, so I'm kind of looking forward to it. It's always good when you talk about something fresh and new, and
Well,
especially something that's gobsmacking and jaw dropping like this. It's just such an almost ridiculous tale, but something that actually happened and was played out all over the British media. That
well,
is,
if we're
you know,
we're all still around after the elections in America and a comet doesn't hit our planet, maybe next year you can, or you can come on and talk about Highgate Vampire next time.
yeah. Honestly, I'd love to
Fascinating.
because it's such an honestly, it's such an incredible story. And the more it goes on, the more ridiculous it becomes, and the more overblown it becomes, and
Oh my
it just
goodness.
becomes this almost like soap opera that actually has quite sad repercussions down the line. But it's a
Wow.
fascinating story of, and again, probably it shows how the media can even then can manipulate something as well, and
Well,
that's
we
what
know
becomes
they do that, don't we?
yeah.
All right, Gary, I'm just
Absolutely.
gonna put you in the green room and tie this up, but I thank you so much for coming
Oh,
on.
lovely to speak to you again.
Thank you.
Always good things to do. It's always good to be part of the show as well. Thanks for having
Awesome.
me on.
Thank you. All right, guys. Thanks so much for tuning in. That was I mean, I couldn't stop asking questions. It's just such a fascinating topic about Kenneth Anger. And like you said, if you can get those original books, Hollywood Babylon, grab them and read them and find out what Kenneth has to say about Hollywood in depth. And there is also a documentary. If you type in Kenneth Anger, Hollywood Babylon in YouTube, you will find that documentary where he talks all about this. Please remember to follow me on Rumble, Gen X on X. Thank you so much. The website where everything is genxonx.com. That's all I have to say. Tune in next week. I've got Dr. Dean Bertram. He has documentaries out that just won film festivals and stuff. He's on UFOs. He's going to come and talk about it's a specific UFO topic. I'll put it out next week. I just can't remember it off the top of my head, but Dr. Dean Bertram's coming in. And prayers for my guest that was supposed to come on. Jack Danger was supposed to come on next week. He's in Asheville, North Carolina, and unfortunately, they have been tragically hit with hurricane stuff, and there's no power. And so, pray for Jack and North Carolina and anyone who's victims of the hurricane that they get the help that they need and everything gets back up in order. So, guys, I'm going to take off right now, and thank you so much. We will see you.